Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome to our talk. Today, the topic is the sixth gear. And I was writing this week about this feeling that I have about people who grew up with a lot of chaos. I am one of those people. And I'm talking about things like growing up in households where you're not sure what to expect from day to day, from moment to moment, where there's just a lot of volatility in the environment that can be caused by, maybe like one of your primary caregivers' tempers, or if you're dealing with somebody, in my case, like at my mom's house, she's an alcoholic. So I just did not know most nights, like how the night was going to go. And I was writing about that feeling of kind of, it's almost like the timer would start when I would hear that sort of like flunk sound of like the cork coming out of the first bottle of Chardonnay, usually around 5 o'clock, sometimes earlier. And that was kind of like the starting bell. And then I would be listening. If it was a night where she was home, I would be paying attention to see like what kind of mood is she in? Did she have friends over? Like what was the conversation? How many corks were piling up as the night was going on? At my dad's, I had a similar kind of watching, looking, paying attention, but at his house, it was based around the phone and his constant womanizing. So what would happen is if the phone would ring and it was one of my dad's lady friends calling the house, that would essentially ruin the night. Because if my dad got to the phone first, sometimes he could sort of like head it off. I would still be... Everybody would kind of like stop breathing when the phone rang at my dad's house, because you just did not know what was going to happen. If my stepmom answered the phone, it was over, because if it was a woman asking for my dad, and that's all it ever was, she would lock herself in the bathroom and just run a really hot bath, and she'd be in the tub all night sobbing. And for me, I loved her. And it's a terrible feeling to hear someone in that kind of pain and not really understand, and then my dad would sort of roll his eyes and shake his head and act like, she's being ridiculous and these are just, friends. But I knew they weren't because he would take me on these dates with him. And this has started when I was, 4, 5, 6, 7 after school. And he'd park me in front of the TV. He'd go quote unquote rehearse in the bedroom with one of these women. And then we would go home to my stepmom, who would have dinner on the table. And he would tell me on the way home, like, we're not going to tell her that we did that, even though I was just rehearsing and it wasn't a big deal. She won't understand. I don't want to hurt her feelings, and she gets really jealous. It was all about her being jealous. And then he would also sometimes tell me he couldn't commit and he needed to be free, and he would start sobbing. So it's just this whole thing, and my mom too, like she couldn't share. And so as a little kid, you don't know how things work. And I felt sorry for my dad and, thought like he's the victim of all these women who just won't share. So, but at his house, I was constantly worrying about the phone ringing. And if the night was going to be overtaken by, this kind of sadness that was really beyond my ability to understand or manage. And a lot of the time he would end up sobbing in my arms, and it was just really painful. So, and at my mom's, it was, sometimes she would go out. And eventually, she got remarried and she had my little brother. And my mom and stepdad were very social. They'd be out a lot. And I would be home with my brother. And I would really try to make sure everything was perfect, by the time they got back. Like the house was clean, and my mother had very high standards for what a clean house meant. So couch pillows fluffed, like nothing out of place. My brother would be asleep. Like my homework would be done. No fork in the sink. My clothes would be laid out for the morning, like lunch packed for the next day, everything done. I would be in my room with the door shut. I would pretend to be asleep, and I would be holding my breath when they came in and listening to see how she sounded and what was going to happen. And 9 times out of 10, she would open my door and flip on my light and find a reason to unleash. And that's a lot of what happens with alcoholism. It doesn't matter what you do. There is no, there's just no way to control what's going to happen. But as a kid, you're trying, and you're constantly scanning the environment for danger. And you're constantly trying to figure out what you can do to maybe head it off at the pass, or, outsmart the trouble, or keep yourself safe. And I had all of this on my mind because last week, after I recorded the podcast, I went and had lunch with my agent, my literary agent, and she's a good friend of mine. And we went to this cafe, and we were, just had a really wonderful lunch. And it's a strange time in this country, and I was writing about that too, because it's like you want to find this shifting awareness, this ability to go and have lunch and connect with your friends and laugh, hear about what's happening in someone's life, how their kids are doing, what's happening in their work life, and also be paying attention to what's happening in the country, because it's, for people who feel the way I do, terrifying, heartbreaking, devastating, enraging, beyond anything that, you ever thought you would see. And so you're trying to figure out how to survive here and how to show up and have a conversation and see how your friend is doing. Check in on people, check in on your neighbors, and keep yourself somehow or another, centered, so that you can do the things that you need to do, so that you can sustain, so that you can show up for your kids if you have them, and your creative endeavors and all of that, your community, and also continue to pay attention to what's happening so that you can fight back in whatever ways that you can, and resist and boycott and protest, and, not stop really being engaged. Because again, by my way of thinking, what we're seeing is just devastating. All of our checks and balances being eroded. So of course that comes up as part of a conversation if you're having lunch. But we also tried to just have lunch and talk about other things in life too. We leave lunch and we're walking back toward my car and her house, and we kind of turn the corner onto a side street, and there's a loud bang behind us, and unnaturally loud, one of those where you what was that? And we turned around, and there was traffic, but it had slowed, and there were a lot of people kind of frozen on the corners of the intersection. This is on Ocean Park Boulevard, for those of you who are, familiar with Los Angeles or from here. And it was one of those things where it takes a minute for your brain to understand what you're seeing. Like it's one of those things where almost you're looking at a picture and you know something's off, but it takes a minute to kind of like understand what it is. And I realized, okay, there's a bike overturned in the street, and there is a person on their back in the bike lane. And I realized somebody in a car hit someone on a bike. And then I see the person in the bike lane start moving. And then I realize this person is kind of like the same shape and size of my kids. That this person is a teenager. And it just start like my mom, mom brain, I start moving toward this kid and I realize it's a teenage boy. And, when you get hit by a car, you don't want to start moving too quickly because sometimes shock can mask pain, even broken bones. Like shock is a real serious, causes a giant nervous system response, all that adrenaline, all that, the body's amazing, right? So, and I see him and I couldn't get to him fast enough. He's up on his feet. And so I said, hey, you know what? Why don't you come sit down over here? And I had him sit down on the corner, but like more on the side street. So he was sitting in the grass and he was away from the traffic. And he's like, I think I'm okay. This is not as bad as the last time I got hit by a car on my bike. And I realized like I'm looking at him and he's kind of like grinning at me like in this, lopsided way. And his pupils are dilated. And I said to him, I think you're in shock. Should we give your mom a call? And he pulled out his phone and he opened it up and he put his mom on speaker. She answers right away and he's like, hi, I got hit by a car again. And she kind of yelped, in this way that I just felt it in my chest, just like that awful feeling of your child, not being okay and you're not there. And I said to him, hey, is it okay if I talk to your mom? And he was fine with that. I took her off speaker and I said, I'm here. I introduced myself and I said, the paramedics are on the way. 911 has been called. He did get up out of the street and walk over to the corner. He's not bleeding. He's in one piece. I do think he is in shock. And she said, yes, his voice sounds funny. I think he should definitely have x-rays. I said, yeah, definitely. Cause like his tailbone's hurting, his hip is hurting. So, I told her where we were and I said, are you able to get to us? And she said, I am in Florida until tomorrow. So I just like my heart broke for her because again, it's so easy for me to understand as a mom, like how helpless you would feel if you were in another state and this is your kid, So I just said to her like, okay, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stay here until the ambulance comes. And if you need me to meet him at the ER, I will meet him at the ER. Like I'm here, I'm not going anywhere. And I stayed, and the paramedics came, they totally examined him. They were very much like, yep, he needs to have x-rays. The police came. I mean, everybody came. The person who had hit him had pulled over. It was an older gentleman. And he was, he had given them his insurance and all of that. And he was there. So it's just like a lot of, as these things are, probably like, I don't know, 25, 30 minutes there on the corner. And then they loaded him into the ambulance. And I mean, this kid's like waving at me and thanking me as they're, pulling away. And I ended up talking to his mom and just saying like, you did such a great job. Like really way to go. Wonderful kid. And, let me know like if you need anything at all and please let me know what happens. It turned out he did fracture his hip. He is okay otherwise. And, he's young and he'll be okay, but it was not, it was serious. as everyone was dispersing, I realized the old man is still standing on the corner and he's just by himself now. Like, the cops have left, they loaded the bike into the car, they're going to drop it off at the kid's house. Like, the ambulance is gone. He's just standing there and he did not look well. He looked pale. He was just kind of like staring into the middle distance. Like, he just wasn't. So I went over to him and I I said, "Hey, are you okay?" And he's started to tell me that he'd had a terrible couple of years. His wife is dying. He's broke. Just this was the last thing he needed. He didn't even see the kid, and but he said to me, like, why are they taking him for x-rays? He was up on his feet. He was, walking and talking. And I said to him, I was like, listen, sometimes when you're in shock, you're not feeling, you don't feel it. You don't feel the pain. You don't feel it till the next day sometimes. So it's good that he's getting x-rays, and the best case scenario is that this kid is okay. I said, like, really? And I put my hand on his arm. Think about how much worse this could be and how horrible it would be if he wasn't okay. Seriously, like, and it landed, and he said to me, you're right. Like, you're right. And I have spent a lot of time with people in his age group in the last several years, and I've watched, both of my parents have passed, and it is brutal getting old like that. It's like you start losing people. You lose your childhood friends, your people that you've grown old with. You lose your partner, you lose your siblings. It's like the losses just, they keep coming and they come closer and faster together. You've already lost your parents and now you're just losing everyone. And sometimes your body betrays you. And you can't do the things that you have always been able to do. And sometimes your mind betrays you. It's brutal. It really is. It's lonely and it's scary and it's confusing and it's really hard. So I had a lot of compassion for him too. It's like everybody in that situation, the kid, obviously, right? But his mom, this man, like all of it. And just as I was, saying, like, do you need help getting home? These two women walked up and they were like, hey, are you, they knew him. I won't say his name, but they said hello to him by name. And, are you okay? What are you doing? And he then explained to them what had happened. And they were like, we will go home. Like, we're going to get him home. I was like, okay, great. And I left. But it got me thinking about this experience of what happens when there's an emergency. And, I think for a long time, people were really accustomed to hearing like fight or flight, right? That was kind of that was the go-to phrase. And then it became more mainstream to talk about, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, flop. And maybe flop is not even so much in the mainstream, but, fight or flight, I think most people are pretty familiar with. Like, if you have some sort of emergency or traumatic event or experience where your nervous system is overwhelmed, you might decide to fight. It could be a conversation that suddenly is very charged. Like, it's not necessarily something like a car accident or, your self-coup of your government. Like, it could be something like you're having an altercation that suddenly explodes, in your living room over like apples, and suddenly something else is going on, right? And so there's fight, there's flight. Like, people storm out the door because they just can't handle it. They can't deal with the intense feelings, and so they leave. Freeze is where there's just this like, I can't, I can't speak. I'm like overwhelmed and stuck, right? Like I'm stuck in this moment. I can't, there's just like my heart pounding and my hand shaking. There's all this whatever, but I'm kind of like frozen here. I can't really, this is not a moment where I can like continue having this conversation or this altercation. Fawning is like you try to like, if it's a person. So, for example, in my situation with my mom, there were many times where I tried to make things better by being really, really sweet or really helpful or really cooperative, or I'd try to figure out what can I do like to make her happy so that the night does not take a terrifying turn, a violent turn. And as a kid, you'll do anything. So I flop is when people are so overwhelmed, they can faint, they can become like totally limp and just sit down and collapse. Basically, they're just unable to, the nervous system's just like, I just can't, like, I'm out, I'm done. And I was writing about what I considered to be kind of this sixth gear that, I have seen, and certainly I have in myself, and I think a lot of people who grew up in these environments as a regular thing. And it's like an autopilot or a cruise control, where, you are able to do all the things that you need to do, but you might not be fully there. You get extremely calm, and you know what needs to happen, and you can make it happen, but you're a little bit like in this surreal kind of, you're in this other place inside yourself. And it's a little bit like, I think, trying to balance a scale almost. It's like, okay, there's all this chaos and violence and intensity around me. And so I'm going to find this place inside me that is really calm and still and quiet. And that is where I'm going to be operating from right now. And that's what happens for me when there is some kind of like huge emergency. And that's what happened for me Friday. It's like everything gets quiet and I just focus on what needs to happen. So in some ways, if something really intense is going down, I'm a good person to have around. People like me are good people to have around. We're probably the first people calling 911. We're probably the first people walking over to the person who's been hit by the car. We're going to probably go into action just a little bit faster, but it can also be really super weird. And I was writing about, I've written about it before, but when I was in my 20s, I went to Connecticut. I went to see my one of my oldest, closest, my best friend Tracy, and we were going to go to a yoga class. And I took my parents' minivan, and it was a very cold night, and had been some storms, whatever. But I went, and we went to the class, and then we went back to the house, and we were going to drive to pick up dinner. So we get in the minivan and we're driving, and I hit a patch of black ice. If you're unfamiliar with black ice, you can't see it. It's just the road looks completely normal, and yet there's ice, and there's nothing you can do. The worst thing you can do is put your foot on the brake, because you're just going to, spin. And I knew that. So what you do is you take your foot off the gas, you hold onto the wheel, and you pray if you pray. Like, that's about it. So I did that, and the back end, it's a minivan, it swung out, and we started heading across the opposite lane where traffic comes from the opposite direction. Thankfully, there was no traffic coming from the opposite direction, but we were heading into a stone wall. And there was nothing. There's nothing there's nothing to do. And so I said to Tracy, as we're like literally heading toward this wall, we're going to hit the wall, but we're going to be okay. And we hit the wall and, we were okay. I mean, but this all happened in like 3 or 4 seconds. And I said that to her like a, robot narrator. Like it was, we laughed about it later. We laugh about it to this day because it was so bizarre. We're going to hit the wall, but we're going to be okay. Bam, right? And we were okay. She sprained her sternum and I had whiplash that ended up like I have not done shoulder stand since. I can do headstand, but shoulder stand was never a go for me again. But other than that, we were fine. I put the minivan in reverse. I drove us back to her house. She's doing all the normal things people, she's crying. She like saw her life flash in front of her. She has 2 tiny little boys. She's like thinking about, she was thinking about her boys. And I said to her, we're going to be back in 3 minutes. You can go hug them right away. I love you. Like, because I'm not normally a robot. I'm only that when there's an emergency, when I'm heading toward a stone wall, apparently. So we get back to the driveway and she gets out of the car. And I said, I'm going to stay in the car and I'm going to drive back to New York. I want to tell my parents in person about the car. And she's like looking at me like I'm insane. And she said, I think you should get out and look at the car. So I get out of the minivan and my legs are shaky. I'm having a nervous, it's like I'm having my own thing. And I come to the front of the car and it's like, I was describing it in the essay as like a French bulldog. Like it's not a minivan. There is no front of the car. It's completely like this accordion sort of like smushed thing with lights that are, there's like a light hanging off one way, one the other. There's smoke coming out from under the hood. Like it's kind of funny that anyone would think the car was drivable. It's completely not. And that there is this thing of just like, there's such a thing as being too calm, And that is kind of where my mind went. I started thinking about all the different times in my life where I've been in that state of, okay, there's like an emergency happening and I understand what needs to happen. Or like, here's the way the shock hit me this time or that time. There was when my son was, I think he was 7 and my daughter was like 4, almost 5. They're like 2 years and 9 months apart. So depending on the time of year, they're either 2 or 3 years apart. But I think he was 7 and they were, we pulled into the driveway and they got out of the back seat. I was getting out of the, driver's side and I went to the gate and suddenly my son was screaming, but just like a sound, and I went running over to his side of the car and the door was closed, but his finger was like, his index finger was stuck in the door and not in the part that you enter. It was in the hinge. And it took a second, I was like staring at it. He was staring at it. We were both staring at it to realize what I was looking at, and I instantly then opened the door and then thankfully it was the tip of his finger. It was purple and flattened, but he lost the nail. Obviously his finger was okay, but we were, that's when the tears came. Like it just was the shock of what is happening. And about a year after that, I got a call from my my kids' elementary school, and they had been playing on the yard and at recess, and they were in different grades. Obviously, like my son's older, but my daughter had seen him across the yard and started running toward him, and she tripped and fell and hit her chin and split it like right where people do, right underneath the jawline. And when she stood up, she just was like gushing blood down the front of her. Just her whole shirt was covered, just screaming. And my son went running toward her, and a guard got to her first and like did not know they were siblings and wouldn't let him go to the nurse's office with her, which just every time I think of that moment, it crushes me. But anyway, the nurse called me and said, "Hey, I think you should come." And I was like locking the door before she even finished the sentence, and getting in my car, and she's telling me what happened. And she said, I said to her, "Is it bad?" And she's like, "I can see white. Like, I think she's definitely going to need stitches." So I just was there in like 3 minutes, got her, took her to the ER. And, I was just like describing that feeling of just sitting there. We had to wait a little bit. And I was like rocking her and telling her it was going to be okay. But when you are a mom, sometimes it's like you really wish someone else would be telling you it's going to be okay. Like I did the single mom thing for so long, and it's rough. It's rough sometimes, it's just, anyway. And then the doctor came and basically said, we should do a combination of stitches and glue, and I will I'm going to give you some ice, and then we're going to like numb her with anesthetic, and then we'll proceed. So I said, okay. And, we do all that. And now we're going to like do the stitches, and they bring her into this room. They've obviously cleaned everything and all of that. And they put her on the table, and they, strap her arms in, and I'm telling her, now she's completely numb, and I'm saying to her, like, everything's going to be okay. And she's believing me. And that also is incredibly humbling when you are, someone's parent, and your kids just trust you like that. It's like, it's so humbling. It breaks your heart in this way, and then I thought, and it's funny when I think about it now, but I really thought like, I'll be okay because I watched The Walking Dead and I have an iron stomach. When that like fish hook came out and the doctor started going for my daughter's chin, the room went gray. My stomach was like flipping over, everything went sideways and got pixelated. And I thought, I'm going to pass out. And I'm holding my daughter's hand. She couldn't see me because they had her head strapped, everything was like strapped so she couldn't move. But she knew I was there. I put my head down as close to the bed as I could. I was like, basically had my head like on her little hip bone. And I just was saying to myself, like, passing out is not an option. Like, you cannot do that. And the doctor said to me, "Hey, Mom, you okay?" Like, and it sounded like, she's like talking me through a tunnel. And I like, I nodded and then made myself say yes so my daughter could hear me. And I remember thinking to myself, it's so weird when people call you mom and they're not like your kids. And then after it was over, the doctor like said, okay, like great job to my daughter. And then she said to me, like, you need to sit down and put your head between your knees. And then she told somebody to get me apple juice and graham crackers. And she also had somebody bring me a brown paper bag to breathe into. I forgot about that when I was writing the essay. I just listened to her because I know when I'm beat. I know when I'm not like okay. And I actually really appreciated that she like took charge and said what needed to happen. It's like there are times where it's really nice when someone is like, this is what needs to happen now. You're going to drink that juice. You're going to eat those graham crackers. You're going to breathe into this bag. You're going to put your head between your knees. Like, this is what's happening. Great. I will happily follow those directions. Tell me what I need to do to make things better. And I think that part of what's happening in this country is a certain level of shock for a lot of people that, we're looking at what is happening every day there's something new. And it is so, it is so shocking for people who are, looking at things the way that I am, who have always believed in the Constitution and can see this as a constitutional crisis, can see that our checks and balances are being eroded. It's just unbelievable. And it has been so fast. And I think there is this level of, what do we do here? Because I know for me, and if you have been following along, reading, listening, whatever, like I've been saying this stuff for a long time. I read Project 2025. I knew what these people wanted to do. I knew. So I knew that. And, you try to say that and people are like, he has nothing to do with that. Like, okay, well, he obviously fully has a lot to do with it, but whatever. And so that part is not a surprise for me. I think what I believed is that there would be more senators and Congress people who cared about the Constitution on both sides of the aisle. I mean, obviously, most of the Democrats have been fighting against this from the beginning, which we have such a it's like everything is just so, I have a lot of feelings about what I wish I was seeing, right now. But I am shocked, and I have been shocked by, I really thought that there would be more Republican senators and Congress people who would fight and would want to uphold the Constitution and would have allegiance to that more than a man. I really thought that. And so that part has been shocking, because the man will come and go. The administration will come and go. But, the Constitution, the checks and balances, like democracy, if we lose that, we're in just a different world. And I thought more people would understand that and care about that and not allow that to happen. And so that part has been a real shock for me and a real heartbreak. And it's been, it's just, and it continues to be, I'm not shocked anymore. I'd have to be, I don't know what, to still be shocked. I'm not shocked anymore, but I'm deeply saddened. And, really, it's at the point now where it's like, if you can still look at what's happening and support it, I really don't know what to say. There's not a bridge for us to stand on here, because people are being denied due process. And the minute you are okay with that happening for some people, you're okay with it happening for all people, that's what you're signing off on. And, you might say to yourself, well, I could talk about this for days and days, but that's the part of this, that is not, I think it's getting missed by far too many people. And that's the part that's really scary, because if we continue down this path, we really won't be in a democracy anymore. And so, what do you do? I see people sometimes on social media, I see comments and from people in other countries, they're like, why aren't you guys fighting? You're running out of time, and why aren't you doing anything? What are you waiting for? I mean, the constitutional crisis is happening, and, democracy is on fire. Don't wait. This happened in my country. Do not wait. And, you're a little bit, if you're here, it's like, hey, listen, for those of us who agree with you, we're not sure how to, other than the things that people who feel the way I do, that we have been doing, like boycotting, right? These, corporations that caved to the anti-DEI policies, a lot of people are boycotting those companies. The protests, all of the actions that people are trying to take locally in their own communities to support their neighbors and try to keep people safe. There's a lot of stuff that is happening that people are, really trying to fight. And there's also the things that are happening in the courts that are positive. The people who feel the way I do still want to believe that there is, a rule of law, that there is that the Constitution is going to sustain and hold up, and that there are people who are fighting, like the law firms that are fighting back instead of caving, and the universities that are fighting back instead of caving. The more that we see that happening, that's like, there's always a groundswell. There's like a huge swell of support when the colleges like band together and say, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to let the federal government tell us what we're allowed to teach. This should be for everyone, no matter what party you're in. If you have studied history at all, you ought to understand the minute the government is telling universities and schools what the curriculum should be, you are not in a democracy anymore. You're not in a good situation anymore. It's like, that's indoctrination. That does not go well. And so I was talking about this thing of like, when you're in a situation and you're not sure like what to do, and there is a little bit of shock, and you haven't been in a situation like this before. I knew early. I knew February 1st when Elon Musk showed up at the Treasury with those 6 kids and the flash drives. I knew, oh boy, we are in a whole other world. And when senators were going live on Instagram that weekend, February 1st, 2nd, 3rd, to tell us that Elon Musk was in the Treasury with 6 kids and flash drives, and one of those kids had a social media handle that is big balls, I'm like, this is bad. Like, they should not be at home on their couches going live on Instagram to tell us this outrageous thing is happening. Like, there is an unelected, whacked out billionaire in the Treasury with 6 kids who are 18 to 24. And they have flash drives, and they're taking our most personal financial information. And our senators they're telling us in real time, this is what's happening, and this is where it's happening, and this is who's doing it. And no one's gonna stop them? We're just gonna tell you this is happening right now. It's insane. And I knew in that moment, I knew we were in a lot of trouble. And I called it a coup that weekend. And in the essay that week, I called it a coup, a self-coup, because I knew we were way outside the lines of anything that, we've ever seen before here. I've been living in this country a long time. I was born here. I love the Constitution, and I always thought that, I've never felt like we are who we say we are. The Declaration of Independence and pledging allegiance, all that stuff. It's like, we're not who we say we are. This has never been a country where it's the land of the free, unless you are a straight white man, straight white Christian man. That's the facts. Like, just go back and look. I'm sorry, I'm not gonna litigate that. Everyone else under the sun has had to fight for every single right they have, and still is fighting. Also, this is stolen land, so we could, start there. when you plant your flag on stolen land, your foundation's already, it's, you've already got a broken foundation. So I've never been naive about how things are here and like how much further we need to go in order to create something that is even remotely like just or empathetic or kind or inclusive. But I was hopeful that even if we were moving incrementally in the right direction, we were at least hopefully moving in the right direction. And now we have just, boomerang back in the worst possible, we're just, I don't think this has ever been as bad as it is right now in this country, like where we are, the way that people's rights are being jeopardized right now. And it's every day there's something else. And so, part of what I think people do when they're like writing or when they're talking, and even just like saying these things, it's part of, calling it out is part of trying to deal with it. It's like saying we're going to hit the wall, but we're going to be okay. It's saying you don't talk about attack plans in a group chat on Signal. You don't, deny people due process and kidnap them in the dead of night and traffic them to El Salvador and put them in a mega prison. Like, you don't do that. You don't arrest women in Georgia for having miscarriages. You don't, you don't wipe out every woman's accomplishments on every government website, every woman of color, you don't do that. You say these things, right? You try to state these things like, wait a second, this is not how we do. This is not what we do. This is not how things should be. The federal government should not be extorting the superintendents of schools across the country and telling them if they want federal funds, they better sign these policies. This is not what we do. You say these things, and in stating them, you're stating them for yourself, but you're also stating them for the other people who feel the way you do, who are like, yes, because that way that like you're not alone. Those people know they're not alone. And you're also trying to, once again, like find that, that world where it's like, wait, this is not how we treat people. This is not how things should be. And there are a lot of people, I posted something about the whole, the superintendents and the public schools. And this is just an aside. I didn't even write about this in the essay, but, there's a superintendent who pushed back and said, I'm not signing this. These superintendents were given 10 days. It's like, sign this or you're not getting your funding. And there was this one superintendent whose name is being protected said, I'm not going to sign that. And I posted it. I posted the letter that went out to all the superintendents and her response. And I said, it is a really wild thing to be proud, to say proudly, I'm against diversity. I'm against equity. I'm against inclusion. Like, screw you with your, diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. That is really like, if you just pause for a minute and really think about what you're saying when you're saying that you are against diversity and you're against equity and you're against inclusion, that is not pretty. And that is certainly not something to be pounding your chest and like proudly declaring. That's some stuff to really like stop and pause and like do some reflection there, like really think about what is happening, that you have been swayed, convinced to believe that is like a stance you want to get behind, because I really don't know what to say. But somebody attacked me from like that, from a yoga perspective. Like, oh, how about like, I thought, yoga is about like holding space through people. There's something just to help with that. Cause like, I'm not making that a big part of this conversation, and it wasn't anything that I was writing about either, but just to really help with that, there's something called the yama and niyama. And I actually wrote about it in my first book. That's the foundation of the yoga practice. Those are basically like, you know, we could call it's like yoga's 10 commandments. So yoga's not a religion, but it's like, these are the things we're going to do, these things, and we're not going to do these other things. And it's all the same stuff. When you boil it down, most spiritual traditions, right? It's going to be like, don't harm anyone, don't hoard, don't try not to think about how you're walking through the world, and try to walk gently and pay attention to what you are doing, and try not to cause any harm, and really think about what that looks like and what that means. You're not even supposed to be thinking about the physical practice until you get that stuff down. And there are people talking to me about, how can you say that? Hey, why don't you take a minute and go read that stuff, and then we can have this conversation. If you're confused, if you think I'm supposed to be holding space for people who don't believe everyone deserves equity, and equitable access to, clean air and drinkable water and a good education and solid infrastructure and affordable healthcare. If you think only some people deserve that and other people don't, and only some people deserve due process and other people don't, and only some people should have free speech and other people shouldn't, we shouldn't, I can't even, as far as yoga goes, if you want to talk about that, you got to go read the yama and niyama first. Then you can come back and we can talk, because you're confused. You haven't done that very, very basic stuff. You might be able to put your ankle behind your head, but that's not it. So that. Anyway, what I was really writing about is that sixth gear, that whole idea of what do you do in this moment? What do you do when, you're watching your country and all these ideals that you hold so dear, crumble, and you're not sure what to do. You're not sure what the best possible action is that you could be taking. You're trying to do everything, but it is, none of us have ever lived through this before. And a lot of the checks and balances are not working. And, a lot of big institutions are caving. And then we have what's happening with journalism, and a lot of those institutions are now owned by billionaires who are in the pocket of the current administration. So that becomes really difficult. There's just a lot of, tentacles to this whole thing that are just falling. They're just falling. And so it's difficult. And I think from the outside, people must be wondering, why aren't you guys fighting harder, doing more? I think everyone's trying. I don't know that there's anything that's going to be a quick solution here. But I think what we are experiencing, what a lot of people are seeing from the outside, is we're kind of in that state of watching the corks pile up on the dining room table and trying to figure out how bad is this going to be? How do we try to keep ourselves safe? How do we keep each other safe? What can we do here? And most people I know have some kind of escape plan, even if it's very vague. Nobody wants to leave their country. People don't want to do that. They want to stay, they want to fight. They want to not give up. But it's tough. It's really hard, and it's really painful. And sometimes you do know what to do. teenage kid gets hit by a car, of course you stay. You know, his mom is not there, you stay. You know what to do. The old man standing on the corner by himself, of course you check on him. You have an elderly neighbor who lives alone, yeah, try to like make sure they're okay. Like it's obvious what you do. Your kid needs stitches, you know, you're going to do everything in your power to not pass out. Like there are things that you know what to do, and then there are things that you're not really sure, you know, what to do, but at least speaking, saying the words out loud, saying this is not okay is something, you know, is trying to be on the right side of history, trying to say out loud that completely lacks empathy. That is absolutely not okay. That is, you know, no, like full stop. Like, no, that's not it. You know, this is not acceptable. This is not what we're, you know, this is not going to go anywhere. We're not going in a good direction if we continue the way that we're going. At least saying it helps, and then trying to figure out. And I think that's where a lot of us are. And you know, try to have compassion for yourself, and also maybe figure out, it probably does shift. Sometimes I'm in sixth gear. You know, sometimes I'm in that place where I'm doing the things that need to get done, but I'm not fully, you know, I can't fully take all of the heartache and heartbreak and rage in, or I won't be able to go do anything. And other times I'm fully feeling those feelings, and I'm able to transmute those feelings into meaningful, productive action. You know, it's like you got to give yourself some compassion here, and some patience, and some understanding, and hope that other people who are not living this right now will also extend that, you know, in our direction too, because it really is not an easy moment here in our history. It is really painful and just hard. It's hard to function. And I think a lot of us are watching kind of like the car crash of our democracy, and there are a lot of stunned people here trying to figure it out. And I just hope we figure it out, you know, sooner than later. And I hope that more people, you know, like I said, I am no longer in shock. I think I was for a while, and I'm not now. It only takes 3.5 million people to resist, and boycotting really helps. All these things are linked in my essay. So, you know, saying the things out loud does help. This whole idea of like, you want more babies here. Don't give women $5,000. Do you know how fast $5,000 goes when you have a child, first of all? And secondly, a medal. And third, these, you know, this whole, we're going to give like Fulbright fellowships. Like we're going to allocate 30% of all fellowships to married families. Well, they're talking about straight married families. They don't recognize other marriages. So that's discrimination against any queer families that you might know, you know, if you happen to care. If you have friends who are two moms, two dads, their kids don't get any of that. They don't get any of that. Like that's not it. If you want more babies in this country, how about like some paid time off, some family paid leave, some affordable childcare, some affordable health care, you know, access to good education. And I don't know, how about some sane gun control laws so that children we have don't get shot in the classroom every single week? How about that? You know, how about free lunches at school? Why don't you support that stuff? That's what you do if you want to see more babies here. Help. That's what you do. Anyway, I appreciate, you know, your being here. It helps to connect with people who are on the same page, certainly, and, you know, who are also feeling a lot of heartache and heartbreak and rage and shock and confusion about what to do all the time, not quite knowing like when to just sit down and put their head between their legs, or, not always having that feeling like we're going to hit the wall, but we're going to be okay. I do think we're going to be okay. I do. Most days, I think we're going to be okay. I have faith in humanity. And I think that when you look back historically, the people who are against diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're never the good guys. And I don't know, I just think we tend to move toward something better than that. I think God, I wish we would just learn faster. I wish we would learn faster. I really do. But I think we're going to be okay. I think we just have to like stick together, keep saying the true things out loud, keep fighting back where we can, as we can, and hold on tight, hold on to each other. Check in on your neighbors, check in on your neighbors, check in on your friends, and you know where to find me if you need support. Okay? Till next time.